Let's just jump into Matthew 16. We're going to reference back to a few things here in a little bit. But jumping right off the bat into Matthew 16 and verse 1, it says, "And the Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. And he answered them, when it is evening, you say it'll be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it'll be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." So he left them and departed. So I think sign of Jonah, I think we see the resurrection in that, right? In the belly of the fish, 3 days comes out. I think that's the reference there. The question that I think is interesting in this section that I want to ask is, why not give them another sign? I mean, it's to test him, right? And we know that their intents aren't true. But why not? Just in case. Why not offer another sign to everybody else who's there? Or, is that really such a bad thing? I mean, Gideon got like 6 signs from God, right? The fleece and the ground and the swaparoo, and then the people in the camp, and all the signs, right? What's the harm? Why not give them a sign here? Yeah.
Well, they've had plenty of signs already. The way we can read that as well is, no other sign will be given to this generation except the sign of Jonah. And the Gospel of John tells us that Jesus did more than they could even write about.
Yeah.
So they had the evidence. It's just that they weren't accepting what was already offered.
I think that's right. And it goes back to the parables, right? Why did Jesus teach in parables? When they say, "Why do you talk in parables, Jesus?" What did he say? Yeah, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear. If you don't want to listen, you don't have to, right? If you don't want to interpret the parable, I'm not going to make you. This is for those that are seeking the truth. And so he talked in parables. And for those that want to understand, the parables are incredibly powerful and helpful, right? But for people who want to, who's this guy talking about farming? I don't care about some farming illustration. They can be dismissive of it too, because what does Jesus want? He wants those who want the Messiah, who want God to come. And so it's almost like he's testing them back a little bit. You want to test me? Well, here's the sign as to whether or not you truly believe, whether or not you listen to the things that I'm doing. I'm not your puppet. I'm not going to do the things that you want me to do for your sake. We're going to do things this way, and you have every opportunity to believe. Every sign, every wonder, every miracle, but they're not on demand, And maybe they just want to, accuse him of working by the power of Beelzebub again or something like that. But it's like, here they are, and they're like, we want a sign. If you're really the Messiah, prove it to us. Is that the nature of the kingdom of heaven? And it's one of the hard things about the Bible and about Jesus' teaching, isn't it? Because as much as he came to seek and save the lost, as much as the gospel is for all, it's also for those who seek the gospel and want to have a relationship with God. He doesn't force you. Jesus isn't forcing them. And I think you kind of see that in this interaction. Any questions, comments about that? I know we're not spending a ton of time on this section. Right. Yeah. Yeah. If God really existed, why doesn't he just put a big golden sign in the sky that says that he is God? Then we'd all believe, right? How could you refute that? Well, I mean, is the rainbow a big, beautiful sign in the sky? I mean, you see how people see what they want to see. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit in the evidences class when we introduced all that, right? That if there was truly irrefutable evidence that no one could deny, that forced everybody to believe, then is it free will to serve God? Then is it actually a choice? And I think that's part of this. He wants obedience. He wants us to choose him because he has chosen us. And I don't think that that's unreasonable at all. And I think you see that kind of extension of that even here. This next section is always kind of funny. It's really easy to be hard on the disciples and the apostles when you read passages like this. I try to be as empathetic as possible, but this one's pretty funny, right? Because the disciples, verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, so they had left and departed. When they reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. And they're like, oh no, we don't have any bread. And Jesus said to them, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they began discussing it among themselves, saying, we brought no bread. What are they thinking? Are they thinking that like the Pharisees and the Sadducees have like poisoned the bread? Like, oh no, he's bringing up the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees because they have poisoned bread and we forgot the bread. Like it's funny, like they're thinking in terms of this, and Jesus says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they somehow think that that's talking about the bread that they forgot, right? And Jesus, of course, aware of this, says, oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets you gathered, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So like they clearly missed the point. So let's be empathetic here. Why did they miss the point, you think? Yeah. Well, when Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fish, and Jesus even says it, right? They had bread to start with. Like he didn't conjure it up, he multiplied it. Now, I don't know, maybe there's like a difference in your mind. I've always felt like that's like a little bit of a different thing. I mean, clearly he has the power if he needed to turn the stones into bread because Satan tempted him to. The food isn't the point. The food doesn't matter. And we understand that ultimately. But in the context, you're like, yeah, but in that case, we had remembered the bread, Jesus. Like we had our lunch with us. We don't have anything now. But I think the other lesson here is like, yeah, you're hungry. And like, that's what you're thinking about is like your next meal. Is that so hard to imagine? Like, what's the context here? Like, they're journeying around in a boat, right? Do they have a lot of money? I mean, like, where are they getting their resources from? Yeah, like, as it comes, donations. I've never lived like that, you know. I know that those that have preached full-time understand a little bit better this idea, right? Because you're living purely off the generosity of a congregation. And that's a different kind of way of living. I've never done that. I don't know exactly what that's like, but I know that there's an element of faith in that, right? That these people are going to take care of me, that the kingdom of heaven, God's people are going to provide. And I think that's a beautiful thing that preachers get to experience that I think impacts the way that they preach and their perception of the world and the nature of the kingdom and all those things. I think that can be powerful. I think it can be dangerous, just like anything can be dangerous, but I think it can be a kind of beautiful, powerful thing. And that's the way that they're living, off the generosity of others, off the donations that exist. And here they don't have anything. And the stuff they had, they forgot. So when are they going to eat again? They don't know. So is it that unreasonable that they would be worried about the fact that they forgot their food? I've done a little bit of camping. Dare I say backpacking in my life, not like, months at a time, like 3 nights or something, right? And the big thing that you figure out if you're going to go backpacking of any length at all or camping for any length of all is your food. Because you're going to go out into the woods and there's not going to be food. And so you have to know what you're going to eat. And so even if it's for 3 days, or I have a buddy who goes backpacking like weeks at a time, and you plan out your food and you have it shipped to drop points along the way so that you have your food ready when you get there, right? And there are those that will go out in the wilderness and they're going to bring like a bow and they're going to be like a survivalist for a while. And there's this show, Alone, where they do that, right? And they go out in the woods, and it's like, see who can last the longest with 10 items. And these are people who have like made a career out of it. And they almost all starve themselves to death. And the one who wins is the one who starves the least. Like that's just the nature of it, right? Like you don't have anything. And even if that's what you're like, now granted, they put them in like the Arctic in winter. So it isn't exactly like they're in, some lush place. But I mean, that's the nature of it, right? Like if you don't have food, like that becomes a stressful thing. That's a hard thing. And so, yeah, here they are worried about the bread because they don't have any food. Yeah. How much like sheep we act. I mean, that's what I'm trying to drive at. Because we'll get to Jesus' response here, because Jesus criticizes them. And the point isn't to exonerate. The point is to create the empathy necessary to learn the lesson ourselves. Like, we're not Jesus in the story here, right? We're the ones who are thinking like, I forgot the bread, right? Oh man, I forgot the bread. And Jesus is like, do you not understand what we're doing here? Do you not remember the story of the feeding of the 5,000 or the 4,000? And it's a little bit like what he says in Matthew chapter 6, isn't it? Don't worry about tomorrow, right? Are the lilies of the field clothes greater than these, right? Don't worry what you eat. I mean, like there's kind of this theme here as he's teaching his disciples about this perspective that you should have about the providence of God and the way that he will take care. Now, what does that guarantee in our lives? I don't know. I'm not trying to make a specific application there, but it is a worldview and a perspective, right? That they didn't quite grasp yet. That he's trying to help them understand. And so he says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, and they're thinking about the bread, which is the most understandable thing in the world because you're already thinking about the bread, and Jesus says leaven, which makes you think bread, right? And he says, you've missed the point. And then not only does he say you missed the point, he says you have little faith. These men have abandoned their families and their fishing nets and their livelihood and are wandering around the countryside with Jesus. He's already sent them off, right? On their own without him to preach and to do this work, and they've come back, right? They've already gone through all these things. They've already endured all this. Peter stands out on the water and believes that he can walk on the water with Jesus, and when the storm crushes in on him, he gets nervous and sinks, and Jesus says, you have little faith. Here they're hungry because they don't have any food, and he says, you have little faith. So I want to contextualize that a little bit for us, because they missed the point, and yet it's the most human reaction to the situation that I can imagine, by men who have tremendous faith. Dare I say, greater faith than we do, right? Some of us, maybe. I don't know. I don't know how you evaluate faith. It's not fair. I don't know that we should start ranking faith. Let's get the whiteboard out. Who's got number one faith in the building? That's a terrible idea. But I mean, you see what I'm saying, though? Like, these are men who have given up everything to follow Jesus. They're in the boat. They're on the other side. They don't have any food. And he says, you have little faith. You've misunderstood. Because what is he actually talking about? The teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And what's their teaching? What's the problem with that? Why is he warning them about that? How does it affect them, right? Like, what is the implication of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees that it's worth noting specifically to them? Beware of these things. Yeah. What's the nature, and we'll get to this in the end of the chapter again, so maybe we're jumping ahead some, but how would you describe the nature of the kingdom of heaven, specifically as we've seen it so far in Matthew? So let's do it this way first. How would you describe the kingdom of the Babylonians, or the the British Empire. How would you describe those kingdoms? Just any words, like it doesn't have to be some technical thing. Yeah, conquering, vast, colonization, bringing people in, right? Like control, powerful. Yeah, like tremendous amount of force. You think about the Greeks and like all those, and like even you think about the Romans or the Greeks, and you think about the establishment of personal property, right? And like the way that they did certain thing and Roman citizenship or whatever it is. Like there's lots of things. Think about the Babylonians, maybe think of math, right? They invented calculus. I know that because Buddy Payne used to yell at 8 a.m. every morning. He'd say, the Babylonians, right? For those of you who ever had calculus with Buddy Payne, you know exactly what I'm talking about. First thing every morning, he would say, back to the Babylonians with his booming voice. I dropped that class and had to retake it. But I mean, you think about these kingdoms and the nature of them, right? And that's the perspective, right? That there's like an empire, there's like maybe a particular leader, and they go out and they conquer people, and they may be good, maybe kind of bad, but they like bring people under their rule by force of might. So then, let's go back to the question. How would you describe the nature of the kingdom of heaven? Faith. Yeah. How does it grow? What causes the tremendous spread of the gospel in the first century? Persecution, scattering them. Like what establishes the kingdom of heaven? And we're going to get to this. We've already alluded to it a little bit at the first part, but Jesus is going to get to it later in the chapter again. Jesus' death and resurrection. Like there's a fundamental difference here between the kingdom that Jesus is establishing and the kingdoms that exist in the world, like fundamentally by nature. So going back to the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, how do they perceive the kingdom or what's going to come or their own role in the world? Very much in line with the way that kingdoms of the earth are framed. Money and wealth and power and control. Yeah. That's exactly right. And I would argue that we're still trying to wrap our minds around that concept too, right? Like, I'm a proud American, like long history of like siblings and parents and grandparents, not parents, serving in the military, right? Like proud of our heritage, like proud to be an American. But it's easy to say that we're a Christian country and to start thinking of ourselves in terms of a physical kingdom and not recognizing that we are a part of a different kingdom. Yeah, we may be citizens, just like Paul was a citizen of Rome. We're citizens of the United States of America, but we're part of a different kingdom that's not limited to the borders of the United States. It's global, right? Wherever the Bible is, wherever the gospel, that's the kingdom that we're really a part of. That's a hard thing, right? Because we see America and we live in America and we have a flag and we have a pledge of allegiance that says under God, and we have these values that we think exist that are aligned with Christianity, which may be true, and it's great, and it's a wonderful thing, but that's not the kingdom that we belong to. And that's a constantly difficult thing for us to wrap our minds around. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they see the kingdom this way. We are God's people and God's kingdom. And by the way, that's the way it was under the Old Testament, that there was a civil and religious community that was both of those things. But that was never what God intended all along. And in fact, it was proven to not work. They couldn't keep the commandments. They couldn't keep that relationship. And so now there's something different that's occurring. There's a different nature to the kingdom. And it's not defined by the sword or by might or by lines on a map. It's defined by the hearts and the service of the people that are part of the kingdom. That's the difference here. There's a different fundamental nature. And we've seen that from the beginning of Matthew, right? That there's a movement that's taking place, a change that's existing in the world that's not like anything that's ever happened before. It's countercultural, fundamentally. It's almost counterhuman in some ways, right? Because it goes against the direction that the world is going. Paul talks about this quite a bit, 1 Corinthians 1, right? Foolishness to those who are perishing. It's a different direction, and it's defined not by power and might and strength and the ability to take a life. It's defined rather by God's ability to give life back to us. Now, death doesn't mean what it did, and suffering doesn't mean what it did, because there's a path through the valley of the shadow of death, right? And so we fear no evil because we believe in a resurrection. And that's what he's pointing them all to. That's why he says, you've missed the point about the bread. Don't worry about the bread. The food doesn't matter. One, God can provide that if that's what needs to be. God can make food appear whenever he wants to, right? Can make it rain, can make the crops grow. Food can exist. The thing that we need to understand is that we have to choose God to receive something greater, right? Something much more powerful. And if you believe in this kingdom that's being established, that is a fundamentally different nature, it goes back to the parables that we read, right? Like the pearl of great price. You sell all that you have for this one thing. You give everything up for this one thing. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees don't get it. Beware the leaven. Beware their teaching. They're trying to grasp onto something. And if you're not careful, you're going to find yourself in the same boat. You're going to try to grasp those same things. Don't fall for that trap. See things differently. Understand this movement differently. It's pretty powerful, the way that he goes through all this. And it kind of builds off this. Any questions, comments? This next section is interesting then too, the way he builds on it. Verse 13. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, they're kind of away from everybody now. They're kind of off the reservation a little bit. You know, like they're not even really in Galilee anymore. They're not like in a big city. They've kind of gone off and they're kind of by themselves. And he asked the disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. When you think of Elijah, what do you think of as a prophet? Yeah, bold, Mount Carmel, taunting the prophets of Baal, slaughtering them, and the river running red with their blood because he has this great victory for God and calls fire down on the altar, right? Like, that's Elijah. When you think of Jeremiah, what do you think of? Yeah, you think of a guy who has the weight of the world on his shoulders, is persecuted, mistreated, and his job is to say, you're all going to die. And he has to say it every day, and they throw him in a pit, and they torture him, and he says, you're all going to die. Repent. And his end is to be hauled off to Egypt with the rest of the people as he tells them not to, and there he dies with the rest of the Israelites who tried to escape God's judgment. Not a weak man by any means, right? Like a hard message and like a different kind of strength to it. When you think of, what's the other example? John the Baptist, the teachings of John the Baptist, what do you think of? Yeah, the axe is laid at the root of the tree. Now look, we can look at Elijah and see the way he was in the cave, was that going to be a comment, Ian? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's right. You have Elijah in the cave, you have John the Baptist sending messengers to Jesus, you have those moments. But when you think of those men, that's not really what you think about. You think of the bold victory, right? What does that say about Jesus that those are the names that come to mind when they say, this is who people say that you are? What does that say about the way that Jesus has operated? Those are the names. Because I think that's interesting, right? Like they just saw John the Baptist, a man like coming out of the wilderness, eating milk, locusts, and honey, wearing camel skin, condemning the Pharisees, preaching a hard message. Like what we see in the gospel doesn't really quite align the same way with those things, which is interesting. And so maybe it's just the prophets in general, and these people aren't that sophisticated in knowing the ins and outs. But I do think it says something about the way that Jesus taught and his personality that they go back to those men, right? And the way that they preached and the way that they taught. It says something about the difficulty and the directness of the way that he addressed them, which I think is worth noting. But then he says, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Pretty incredible. Like we could piece together the Gospels, the I am statements of John and some of the other things that have occurred, and we're like, yeah, well, this is the reasonable conclusion to say this at this time. But what does it mean for Peter to confess this, to say this? Like, what's the implication? And that the time for the kingdom of heaven to come to earth is now. If Jesus is the Messiah, what's happened to there were a lot of other people who claimed to be the Messiah before this, in the 100 years leading up to Jesus. What happened to them and their movements? Most all of them died. Here they are, off in the wilderness, and Jesus asks them, and Peter makes this confession. I mean, it's a big deal, because it isn't just belief and all the things that happen. Like admitting this and saying it out loud makes you marked by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, by the Romans. This means that we're taking over, that a kingdom is coming. Like this is a big deal. Like the implications of this for Peter to confess this and to be on board with it is a big deal. Like this is a huge moment in the history of the world, right? But certainly in the life of Peter. Like, yeah, they've been following Jesus and they've given up a lot. But up until this moment, you can go back to your fishing boat, right? Like there's a path back. But once you admit that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's the Son of the living God, that the moment has come for the kingdom to be established, there's not a turning back moment then, right? You're all in. And Jesus recognizes that, and he says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Which we can get caught up in the gates of the keys of the kingdom and all these other things. But I like that part in the middle of this, right? The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Even the gates of hell aren't coming and standing up again. And he goes on to say, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ, which is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this contrast between what others are saying and what Peter says, I think is important to settle in on for a second as well. Because the confession of others is a big deal. This is a prophet of God. Like we believe in God and the prophets, and we believe in the miracles we're seeing, and we confess that Jesus is another one of these prophets. This is a big deal. But I think it's also noteworthy that they're not willing to take that next step. Yeah, he's John the Baptist. Yeah, he's Elijah. Yeah, he's Jeremiah. They're not quite ready to admit that he's the Christ. Why? The others that are around that they're quoting, that have seen the miracles, that have been around Jesus, heard his teachings, why would they be unafraid? Why would they be afraid to say that he's the Christ, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Savior, all those words? And the implications of it. Like, I think you're right. Like, it's the implication of this being the Christ and then trying to match that up with what he's doing is a difficult thing. Because it's not quite what you expected. He's not leading the revolutionary kind of thing that you're expecting. And so if this is the Christ, then maybe the kingdom isn't what we thought it was. And so there's like a couple kind of elements to that are difficult, but Peter's willing to go out and say that. Now, let's talk for a second about what Jesus says in response, calling him Peter, which essentially means rock, or at least is a play on the word rock. Flesh and blood is not a relationship with the Father in heaven. I tell you, you are Peter, you are the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. I think this is kind of going back to Matthew 7, right? Building your house on the rock versus the sand. Like this idea of like your foundation. And so this could be, a lot of people say this is a reference to the rock. The foundation isn't necessarily Peter himself, but rather the confession that he made. The truth of what he said. That's the rock that everything's going to be built on. Maybe that's the case. Maybe he's just referencing Peter and the other disciples generally for being the foundation of the church and the establishment of the kingdom and what's going to come after his resurrection. It could be either one. Obviously, we get particularly nervous about that because the Catholics use this as a way of saying that Peter was the first pope and kind of trying to line all that stuff up. But I don't know that we need to get into that today. I don't see that. But so, and then I'll give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth should be bound in heaven. It's an elevation of the confession and an elevation of who he is and what he's doing and his role within the kingdom that's being established. Verse 20 strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. Why? Because if they tell, what happens? Yeah, they're going to kill him. They're going to kill him. And so it's not time. There's some more work to do. So don't be telling people this stuff. Because we've got some more work to do. Why are they going to kill him when this rumor starts going around? Yeah, I mean, it's the same reason why they kill him in the end, right? Jealousy, frustration, anger that it's not what they expected, that it's pushing them aside, Pharisees and Sadducees specifically, pushing them aside, all those things, right? This is a dangerously deadly truth that Peter has confessed here. And the implications of it are massive. And Jesus says it's not time, which is, I think, is part of the reason why they have this conversation in Caesarea Philippi, not in the middle of the temple in Jerusalem, right? And so from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. So he's saying, look, I'm going to be killed and resurrected. Verse 22. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you." What do you make of Peter here? I mean, I find it incredibly, kind of amazing. It's an incredible thing. He's wrong, right? But the boldness to try and rebuke Jesus and stop this from happening because of your understanding and your this couldn't be easy for Peter to do this. Can you imagine? You have a hard conversation coming up with somebody, and the butterflies you get, the racing heart, the knots in your stomach, or if it's really bad, you just feel sick that you're going to have to talk about this. And Peter, I guarantee you, is feeling all of those things, right? I don't think that the disciples were regularly pulling Jesus aside and rebuking him. And yet Peter does it because he says, I've got to make sure I put a stop to this. This can't happen. Because in his mind, this is the Christ. This is the Son of the living God. This is the Messiah. He can't die. But then equally surprising and incredible to Peter doing this is Jesus' response, because Jesus doesn't say, "Oh, Peter, you misunderstood." What does he say? He says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." I had a friend in high school that maybe this was even when we were in college. We didn't go to college together, but he was going through a rough time. He struggling with depression. He had insomnia. I think some of that's because he would drink energy drinks and stay up playing video games, and then he developed insomnia through that and had all these problems, right? And he's your best friend, and you always get along, but then I felt compelled, right? I need to say something to him. I need to help him. And I was really nervous, and I was really scared, but I kind of rebuked him, you got to get your life right. You got to do these things. And I didn't quite understand the background of everything he was going through. I just knew that his life was kind of unraveling, and so I was going to give him some hard truth, be a good friend. And he just clapped back with, "You have no idea what you're talking about." Started talking about the medications he was on and the therapist he's gone to, and you have no right to speak. And I feel it's a little bit of that kind of stuff here on a much grander scale, right? You're "I'm going to do the hard thing. I'm going to do the good hard thing. I don't want to do it, but I got to." And then you realize that was not the right thing. That was a pretty big mistake. Should not have done that. And then you're how do I get out of this one, right? That's what Peter's going through. He's earnest, right? Impetuous. He's eager. He's trying to do the right thing. And the clap back is, "Get behind me, Satan. You're setting your mind on the things of man, not the things of God. You've completely missed the point. I have come to die." And Peter's "There's no way that's right." And Jesus is "No, that's right. That's what's going to happen." But then the interesting thing is, he calls him Satan and says, "You're a hindrance to me." Why would this be a hindrance to Jesus? Because he doesn't want to die, right? You know what you have to do. You know it's going to be hard. And it's maybe Peter's right, the devil on your shoulder telling you there's a different way. But he's "No, you get behind me." Yeah.
Saves everything up to the night in December. It builds over a period of time and crescendos in Gethsemane. So undoubtedly, whenever Peter says, "Oh, you're the Christ," maybe Jesus is a little bit taken back. "Oh, wait, somebody got it." That's the reply he gives.
Yeah.
And then whenever Peter says, "Yeah, but you can't go through all this," Jesus' reply is, "Wait a minute, I'm already feeling the anxiety. Don't put it in."
Right. Yeah. And to kind of build on that, I think the timing is significant, because after this confession says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. So Luke talks about, he set his face towards Jerusalem. There's a clear defining line in the Gospels about Jesus pre-focusing on Jerusalem and post-focusing on Jerusalem. And then there's also a clear dividing line when Jesus finally gets to Jerusalem that last week, in the way that Jesus teaches and talks and the things that he does. And so at this moment, his 3-year ministry, we typically kind of estimate it, all of that time, he's done all the groundwork. Now it's time to set your focus on the hard task that was ahead of you all along. And there's a difference there, right? You've done the prep work, you've done all these things, but now you actually are facing the reality of what you're going to do. And it's in that moment that Peter says this, takes him aside and rebukes him. And it's you can't do that to me now. Because now's crunch time. Now's the difficulty. Now's the time where it's all before me and I'm marching towards this fate. You can't do it now, Peter. And I feel for him. But again, the lesson, right? Purest of intentions, earnestness beyond belief. but you set your mind on the things of man, not the things of God. And it's such a relatably difficult thing, isn't it? That you're so focused and gung-ho on doing something because you think it's right, and yet you realize my perspective was all wrong. Yeah, Ray.
Of course, we think about the Gospel of Matthew being written to the first Christians who were suffering persecutions. And their question is, why is this happening to us? It was just like the nature of the kingdom. They didn't expect that kind of situation to exist. And this story, of course, shows us that you can't have that attitude. If you have that attitude, you need to get behind these things.
Yeah.
Because your calling is for this purpose. And it was the calling of Jesus to go to the cross. So it's a parallel to what early Christians were facing.
Yeah, and that's a great lead into this next section, which is outlining that very thing. Jesus told the disciples after this, verse 24, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? And what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, you think that we can avoid these things, that this isn't what's supposed to happen. I'm telling you that this is exactly what is supposed to happen. This is the exact path that we are on. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and come follow me. Which, I mean, there are these sections when you read the gospel and the teachings of Jesus that I don't like to read. I don't like them. I've preached sermons on this. We think about this. But we don't like it, right? Like, do we want to take up our cross? Do we want to deny ourselves? No, nobody wants to deny themselves. They want to have everything that they want, right? Like, I don't know, you're on a strict diet because your doctor told you had to be. But then it's somebody's birthday and there's a piece of cake. Do you deny yourself, right? But we're not talking about birthday cake, right? We're talking about all of it. We're talking about an entire worldview and perspective that's now defined by the kingdom of heaven. All the things that we will be drawn to, all the things that you may want, you deny yourself. Because it's not about those things. You take up your cross and you follow Jesus. Why? Because there's something more significant than the chocolate cake or whatever it is in life that we are like trying to cling to. There's something more worthwhile. So as much as you may want these things, as much as you may want to lay hold to them, you need to recognize this teaching of Jesus, right? This fundamental perspective. There's something different happening. And again, I want to go back to this because it all revolves around the resurrection of Jesus. It all revolves around the resurrection that's taught within the gospel, right? Because that's the fundamentally different thing. What makes an emperor so feared, right? Some kingdom. It's that if you disobey, he can kill you, essentially, right? He starts conquering, he starts marching his troops. Alexander the Great's coming, and it's like, what's fearful about that? If we oppose him, he's going to kill us. So we better just, swear fealty. But then why don't we rebel against the horrible rule that exists? Because you may die. And that's terrifying. And so there's this thing that existed within the world in which death was the ultimate fear, right? Because that's the end. Like we don't know what's after that. Like that's the moment that it all stops. And so we are controlled by it. We're scared of it. Like that's the thing. That's the powerful thing. And Jesus came and he rewrote it all, right? What is more powerful than taking a life? There's only one thing. It's giving your life back to you. Which is why Christianity flourished in persecution. Which is why Christianity still exists. Right? Because Christians who have faith and believe say, you can do anything. You can take my life. And that's okay because God will give it back to me. And that's what Jesus is teaching. You may have to deny yourself. You may have to give things up, but it's for a greater blessing, a greater good, something beyond, right? So yeah, you deny yourself. You limit what you're willing to take and what you're willing to do because you know that those things are temporal. And in exchange, you get your soul, you get eternity, you get your life back. Like that's what he's teaching. And that's why this is so dangerous. That's why people are scared of Christianity. That's why they attack it, because it's a greater power than anything that otherwise exists, that God has, that he promises to those that follow him. And so this whole chapter really is dealing with this nature of the kingdom and how different it is from the kingdoms of the earth. All right, appreciate your attention. Comments this morning. We'll do chapter 17 next week.